On today's show, we're going to talk all things running back, strategy to come into your draft with at the running back position, targets for us, busts, sleepers. I want to just start with overall strategy here. I just finished the Exploiting the Default Rankings articles for ESPN and Yahoo. It is not as severe on Yahoo, but even on Yahoo default ranks, which many of our opponents will use as a crutch, the best values through the mid and mid-late rounds are typically wide receiver. There's some, one-offs and some exceptions, but typically the best values there are wide receiver. On ESPN, it's absolutely laughable. Like the wide receivers will be able to steal. More on that in a minute. So the point that we've been trying to make in all our content is that in home leagues, we want to be breaking ties early in the draft by going running back. Leone, maybe you can explain that better than me. Any more general strategy thoughts on running back for the home leagues this year?
Yeah, I think what happens overall is the market tends to overvalue running backs relative to wide receivers. So, with that in mind, a lot of times if you're using our rankings or comparing to the defaults like you did, you're going to see the wide receiver as the best pick. What happens though is early in the draft, it's pretty close. But as we get later into the draft, there's guys, especially younger players, rookie players that don't have, a production profile at the NFL level yet that really start to get buried in the default ADP and the default applet that you're drafting with. And those guys are extreme values. And conversely, the running backs that are shakiest start to move up and get drafted even earlier because people feel the need to get running back. So when you look at those two things in conjunction, you're trying to build the best roster possible. And the best way to do that then is going to be, hey, get a running back that we actually really like in the first two rounds, maybe two of them. And then that frees you up to take advantage of all these wide receiver values throughout the draft. And I think, in past years, we've touched on this strategy, but it just seems more stark this year with a lot of the rookie receivers that we like, and even some non-rookie wide receivers that we liked later. And, on the flip side, we're just, kind of scared of some of these, quote unquote, dead zone running backs. We did a podcast episode on that. Those types of backs are definitely back in home league formats where they're going 2 to 3 rounds earlier than they are in best ball.
When we're looking up at the top of the board, when we're just zeroing in on the first few picks of the draft, and I like to be probably generally, depending on the format and everything, in the top 3, and I'll just pick the slider of Christian McCaffrey, CeeDee Lamb, or Tyreek Hill. But and that's generally in full PPR leagues, etc. Not every home league is full PPR. A lot of half PPR, some no PPR. And in those cases, I think it's tempting to want to maybe select Bijan Robinson or Breece Hall over CeeDee Lamb and or Tyreek Hill, and then the first 3 picks end up being running backs that go off the board.
Yeah. So I think absolutely no doubt for me, if you're picking at 4 in a home league on one of these sites like ESPN or Yahoo, if you're picking 4th, I'm taking Bijan and Breece over Chase, Amon-Ra, Justin Jefferson. Even though I actually prefer the wide receivers there, just from a roster construction standpoint, what we're talking about here, I would go Bijan or Breece there. I think it's more interesting in the scenario Evan's talking about. If you had the 2 pick, Leone, or the 3 pick, that is a more interesting conversation to me, because then you have CeeDee and Tyreek, who I think are a cut above the wide receivers I just mentioned. So what do you think for people who have the 2 and 3 pick?
First off, you really got to know your league mates and how they draft. I think that plays into this quite a bit. If you know they're running back thirsty, I might be tempted to just say, hey, let me lock in the best one when it's a small sacrifice, knowing that I won't have to make a big sacrifice later. I can take advantage of all this wide receiver value. The other tipping point for me would be like, how many wide receivers do you start? If you're starting 2 running backs and 3 wide receivers, Lamb and Tyreek are so good that I think I'd still take one of those guys and hope to get like an Achane or a Kyron or something at the 2-3 turn. But if you're 2 running backs and 2 wide receivers and you're half PPR instead of full PPR, then at that point, I think, just lock in the safety. And, you're doing your best to win your league. You're not trying to necessarily, we talk a lot about these big tournaments and stuff all off season, but when you're trying to win your home league, you're beating 11 other people or what have you. You're not trying to beat thousands of other people. So you don't need to draft to have the team that at the end of the season is going to be the best possible team imaginable. We do want to aim for upside. We do want a super team when we head into the playoffs, but we have to layer in some practicality there. So
Yeah.
I'm definitely fine going Brees or Bijan as early as the number 2 overall pick behind CMC. I'm with Adam. I think in almost all formats, I would take them at pick 4. And then, yeah, the scoring PPR versus half PPR, what your league mates do in 2 receivers versus 3 would probably be how I decide if I take CD and Tyreek over those backs.
I think another unique part about this year is that round 2 is so flat. In other words, I don't see a huge difference between, say, Chris Olave and Brandon Ayuk, or Nico Collins and I don't know, Garrett Wilson or something like that. I don't see huge differences there. And so with that in mind, if I get to round 2, I might be willing to take something like a Pacheco over Olave, or a Achan over Devontae Adams and stuff like that. Because again, that's really close there between those guys. If you look at our rankings, for in our Yahoo rankings, we have Kyron ranked 17th and Marvin Harrison ranked 15th. If I'm on the clock there, even though we have Marvin Harrison ahead and I prefer Marvin Harrison to Kyron, I'm fine going Kyron there from a roster construction standpoint. Again, it's so flat there in round 2, and I want to be breaking ties where it's really close early at the running back position. I did want to note that the scenario Leone alluded to is like the worst case scenario. So the worst case scenario is being empty at running back. Let's say you took Amon-Ra St. Brown instead of Breece Hall. And then in the second round, you took another wide receiver over Achan. And then the worst case scenario is you're empty at running back. You're in the middle rounds. And you're like, well, I guess I got to go Alvin Kamara over Deebo Samuel here, or I got to go Kenneth Walker over Devonta Smith and DJ Moore. And based on ESPN ADP, those are actual things that are happening in drafts. On Yahoo, it's not as severe, but the same concept applies. Malik Neighbors' ADP is 45, Jalen Waddle 40, Tank Dell 64. I want to have running back handled by then, so that those smash wide receivers, I can just scoop them up. Did
you just outline our CEO's draft as the worst case scenario?
Taylor Cavey just came into the chat this morning with a draft report that he did, and he passed on running back in round 1 when it was close, passed on running back again in round 2 when it was close, and he just found himself in a mess. So
I do want to make a note real quick on our rankings, because we have, Bijan and Brees 5th and 6th overall. And I do think it's a natural question to ask, like, if you would take them in a home league 4th overall, like, why are they not ranked 4th overall? And the reason for that, the way we generate our rankings is we're doing projections on the back end. We give everybody a base projection, a ceiling projection, and then based on how many starters we're assuming, we kind of compare that to an average player. So everybody's ranked based on value above replacement player. So that goes into all of our rankings. So to Adam's point, Tyreek Hill's value over replacement is better than Bijan or Brees's. What our rankings aren't able to do going to everything is know how everybody else in your league is going to draft and where the value is going to persist. So if you're optimizing for value over the whole course of your draft, that's why you might go slightly against the rankings early when we have guys really close up top. So don't freak out and think oh, this guy's ranked 6th, I can't take him over the guy ranked 4th. You do want to use some common sense in terms of how your league mates are going to draft. That's a really good point.
And that exactly. Again goes back to knowing your league mates, wherever possible. I think going back to the top of the draft, there's a clear first tier. I think it's very crystal clear first tier: Christian McCaffrey, Bijan Robinson, Breece Hall, and then there's a large group of running backs behind them. I think that because there might be an element. Say you're picking in the top 3, you force one of these running back picks, Bijan Robinson or Breece Hall after Christian McCaffrey, in order to create a run and panic among your league mates. That could really come back to pay off in the 4th and 5th round. All of a sudden you see Zamir White, who Mike Leone hates Zamir White's guts, go in the 4th round.
Yes.
Because people start to feel desperate.
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying? I think that they're, especially in a 10-team league, I think that there could be some real truth to that, forcing those running back picks early, and then you wind up stealing DJ Moore in the 5th round or something like that.
Exactly.
And I mean, this is macro again, but I do think if you get stuck in the quote unquote worst case scenario where you didn't take that running back early when it was close, you weren't sure, you went receiver, and then, something happens where all the other running backs get pushed up the board, at a certain point, what I would do then is just say like, okay, give me an elite quarterback and elite tight end in here instead of chasing like bad running back values. And then I'll just stockpile my bench with running backs. I don't think you want to like panic if you do get in the middle of the draft. Everything we're talking about is avoiding that scenario. But if you get in that scenario, I think pivoting to taking the elite onesies and really dominating there makes more sense than taking a running back 20 spots ahead of where we have them ranked.
Right.
So, yeah.
Okay. Last thing on early stage here, running back starts. Now, this is not something that I normally would ever do. However, I think this year actually sets up pretty well for running back starts in home leagues. Leone, I'm curious what you think about going running back in both round 1 and round 2.
I mean, if it's the right guys, I'm fine with it. We were joking about Taylor, our CEO's draft, but he went Amon-Ra over Brees, and I was like, I would have gone Brees there. And then in the second round, I think he went Drake London over Devin Achane, and I was like, even had you taken Brees, I think I would have gone Achane there in a home league setup where people are gonna. And I guess it's hindsight's 2020. You don't necessarily know your league's gonna be crazy RB thirsty, but I think that's fine. You just want to be careful when you take running backs early. And Pat Crane of Legendary Upside has done a lot of work on this. That they have the requisite kind of like season breaking upside. You don't want to make bets on guys that like maybe have like okay upside, but you're betting on them for projectable volume because they always end up riskier than you think. You need the reward to be worth the risk there. And there are guys like that. Achan, who both the projections team and Evan is really high on. I think Kyron Williams is in there at the end of round 2. Maybe Isaiah Pacheco. There's definitely backs. I think when you start to get to like the ETN, Derrick Henry type backs, when you get out of like the top 8 or 9 backs, that's when they get thrust up like way earlier. Right. Where in best ball, people have the discipline to hold off. In home leagues, people see 8, 9 running backs are gone and they just keep taking them one after the other. And that's where I think I'd rather just say, hey, give me the better receiver. I've already got one running back. And so be it.
For sure. Okay. Let's go to, I did want to ask about handcuffing. I know we get this question all the time about running back strategy. I only like to handcuff my running back in scenarios where we have a deep bench available to us and the backup is actually good and will consolidate if the starter gets hurt. In other words, like Tyler Algier behind Bijan Robinson, I think would consolidate. Blake Corum behind Kyron Williams. I think an interesting one is Jalen Wright behind Devon Achane, but just what I don't want is to carry Jordan Mason on my bench all year, and then Christian McCaffrey gets hurt, and it's like, well, Jordan Mason's actually sharing time with Eli Mitchell, and I don't really have that much here anyways. So, yeah, I don't know, Leone, anything more on handcuffing before we move on?
Honestly, I think you said it right. Like the deeper the bench, the more likely I am to do it, and the certainty that the guy's going to get the workload, I am to do it. In general, in redraft, I'm trying to get luckier and bet on my guys early to stay healthy, and I'd almost rather handcuff someone else's running back and have the ability to have like a crazy good team where someone else's RB1 gets hurt and then I've got their handcuff. But at a certain point, if you feel that good about your team, it might be worth, assuring that you have the Rams starting running back locked in.
Yeah. Okay. Let's get to some guys we like here, Evan. Running backs that we are targeting. I already mentioned some of my favorite guys to start RB with. If I start RB in round 1 and then I get Kyron, Achane, or maybe even Pacheco in round 2, those are solid targets for me. Then I like coming back later. James Conner, DeAndre Swift, Raheem Mostert, Devin Singletary, Chase Brown, Tony Pollard, Jerome Ford types. To me, those are the running backs that don't get pushed up into the dead zone. Those are the ones that are actually available later. So that's kind of the way I'm thinking about it, like a barbell approach. At the top, we talked about the targets. I'd add Kyron, Achane, and Pacheco in there in round 2, and then coming back later at running back with the guys that I mentioned, maybe around 7, 8, 9, 8, 9, 10. That would be an ideal way for my draft to work out. I will have my perfect draft article up later this week for anyone interested in that. But yeah, Evan, any priority targets for you at running back this season?
I mean, if I'm starting wide receiver, running back, or running back wide receiver in the first 2 rounds, I'm more than willing to take Josh Jacobs in the 3rd round. I really believe in that offense. We've talked with Brandon Thorne about how we expect them to be one of the better run blocking offensive lines in the league. And that lack of separation that Marshawn Lloyd never created any separation from A.J. Dillon. Like, the Packers are not going to be incentivized. I think they're going to wind up using Josh Jacobs more than maybe they anticipated at least early in the season, in a really in an environment that should be very conducive to high end production. David Montgomery is a guy that we were just stealing all last year. And I think that Jahmyr Gibbs, I think his role will expand some, but especially early in the season. I mean, David Montgomery is still going to have a huge role in an awesome offense behind an offensive line that is what we have them as like the best in the league, or
Correct.
top
Number one.
three.
Number one, yes.
Number one. And he's kind of like I think he's still a core player for the Lions. And then moving on, Aaron Jones is someone that I've been getting. He goes later than I kind of anticipated he might. I don't expect him to stay healthy all season. He actually is a guy that I'm willing to handcuff really late with Ty Chandler. But Aaron Jones is a really good player, and I think that this offense is going to have a chance to score a lot of points for as long as he stays healthy. I think he's like an RB2, almost /3 priced player who can give you RB1 production as long as he stays healthy.
All right. Leone, any priority targets for you at the running back position in home leagues?
Yeah, I mean, we hit on CMC, Brees, Bijan. If you can get those guys, obviously they're super expensive. When you get into round 2, I'm a little scared of like JT and Barkley. I think they're a little overvalued by the market, but at the same time, I get it. If you're going running back, wide receiver, you might just flip the order and take them ahead. I do think like you'd rather have AJ Brown, Garrett Wilson, Puka Nacua than those guys, and then maybe come back with a Kyron Williams, Derrick Henry, Achane in round 2 if you can. I prefer that to starting with JT or Barkley if you're able to pull it off. Evan hit on Josh Jacobs, which is a tough one to figure out. I'm scared of him in round 2, which is like where his Yahoo ADP is, but then his ESPN ADP is in round 4. And I think like at that point, he's totally fine. I'm with him on David Montgomery. I think he's a really good target in like the 5th, 6th rounds that gives you that great combination of floor plus ceiling if something happens to Gibbs, who already is banged up a little bit. One guy that I'm a little bit of a homer for, but I really like Kenneth Walker in that same range. If you can get him in round 5, he's another guy that I think like Jacobs has a really wide range of where he can go in leagues, but the drum beat from the coaching staff has been really positive that they think he can actually be like a 3-down back. I know a lot of people coming in were like, oh, his success rate's not good. They have Zach Charbonnet. Like, this is a scary back to target, but it sounds like they really do believe in Kenneth Walker, and he's got like the juice, man. Like, he can break off those big runs, those huge plays. Like, that's the type of upside you're looking for, as opposed to like, stable production from Alvin Kamara. Like, give me Kenneth Walker in that spot on an offense that I think could be pretty good. So, and then in general, Adam, the barbell strategy that you mentioned, I think makes a ton of sense. One of the guys at the back end that you can get there, if you have an IR spot, is Jonathan Brooks. He's a really nice pick where he goes, where the guys that go at that point bust a lot anyways. If you can draft him, immediately put him on IR and pick up another running back stash, I think that's huge. And I also, a guy that I didn't expect to like a lot, but I just mentioned in our Slack that I'm higher on than our ranking, is Raheem Mostert, where I'm just doing, kind of like the low IQ on the bell curve, which is like the dude scored 21 touchdowns last year and is penciled in as, co-starter with Devin Achane. And in past years, I think he would have been going in like round 4. He's going behind a lot of the guys that we're talking about, behind Kenneth Walker, behind David Montgomery. I do think he has a David Montgomery-esque profile where it's like he's got this solid base production, and then he's got upside if something happens to Achane. I think betting on that makes a lot of sense.
One guy that I didn't necessarily anticipate getting in drafts, but I have been getting in drafts, is Tony Pollard.
Mm-hmm.
This is like an ambiguous backfield. J.J. Zacharyson has always done a great job of pointing out, like, pick the cheaper guy in the ambiguous backfields. That's a good way to profit over the course of time. But I just think that Tony Pollard, especially how he's looked this preseason, how he looked at the end of last season, actually. Remember his season as a major disappointment. He had horrible touchdown luck. He wasn't explosive until, week 11 or something like that, coming off of that fractured fibula. an ankle dislocation. He showed that explosion down the stretch, and he's looked like he's got it all the way back so far this preseason. I just think he's a lot more talented player than Tajay Spears. Tajay Spears is going to be a factor, but in an offense that I think that we have some optimism might be better than, certainly should take a step forward. I think from last year is going to have more diversity, throw the football. Tony Pollard's a fit for that. I think he's a pretty good pick in like the 7th and 8th round, which is where you can get him.
Yeah, and that's the kind of guy that I'm looking at when I'm executing this barbell strategy. And so what I'm mostly skipping over, and not that I don't like these guys, because I'm okay with some of them, but like that James Cook, Rachaad White, Joe Mixon, Alvin Kamara type range, when those guys are going, I want to be filling myself up with wide receiver, quarterback, tight end. And I do want to make that point. We're not going to do full shows on quarterback and tight end this year because I just think it's pretty straightforward. They are both pretty deep. I am fine with any of our top 8 tight ends as my starting tight end in a home league, so starting with Laporta, Kelsey, and going down to Evan Ingram, any of those. And I'm fine with really any quarterback down to Dak Prescott, who's our quarterback 9. So at both those positions, tight end and quarterback, I'm just looking to scoop up the ones that fall the furthest in those kind of middle, late rounds that fall furthest behind our rank in ADP. And then, like I said, come back later with guys like Pollard, Mostert, Chase Brown, Swift, Connor, those kind of guys. So
I was going to hit like 3 guys I like a lot that go like 130 plus in home leagues. Chase Brown being one of them, goes way earlier in best ball leagues where people are envisioning the upside there. Blake Corum, if you're willing to sit on a guy, but there's nobody with more contingent value, I don't think right now than Blake Corum. I think if something happens to Kyren Williams, Blake Corum skyrockets. I don't think there's any other injury where a back would maybe skyrocket quite as much. Possibly like Braylon Allen with the Jets, but that one's a little bit murkier. But Rico Dowdle too is someone that you can get really late where I think, Zeke looks pretty dusty. It's a really good offense. He's someone that, you could start week 1 if you had to and has some upside. So those guys definitely exist. And to Adam's point, that's why you want to avoid, some of the Kamara, James Cook mixed in types that even though they're solid and they're fine, some of these backs that go 6 rounds later they're not that much different, but the wide receivers sure as hell are way different if you look at round 5 versus round 11.
Exactly. Okay, let's get to some busts. Leone mentioned a couple. I agree with him. I'm a little bit worried about Jonathan Taylor for the same reason. It's kind of the same profile as Saquon Barkley. I like the player. I think it's explosive. I like the offense. But you get worried when Anthony Richardson and Jalen Hurts can steal rushing touchdowns and they don't throw that much to the running back position. So I don't want to say bust on JT or Saquon, but just a little scared there. Kamara, Kamara to me is like, you better be full PPR. And you better be like needing it pretty badly because Kamara, I'm worried he's just not a good runner at this point in his career. And all he can do is like catch checkdowns from Derek Carr. Ramondre Stevenson is someone I've avoided a lot as just a bet against this Patriots offense as a whole, period. So yeah, those are some of the guys that I've kind of not been taking. Evan, any stayaways for you so far during this draft season at the running back position?
Rachaad White was one of the least efficient running backs in football last year, but because he finished 3rd or 4th in the NFL and touches, he was productive in fantasy. It was like all volume. You remember he was one of the NFL's few true every down backs, and I don't think that there's any way that the Bucs can live like that this season. And they went out and they got Bucky Irving, Bucky Irving, by the way, I know that he's he has a lot of support from Ben Gretsch and Sean Siegel. He's looked great this preseason and can play in the passing game. I wouldn't be surprised if Bucky Irving just took the job outright at some point from Rachaad White. James Conner scares me.
Sorry, only other thing I would say on Rachaad White is also they lose Dave Canales, who I think was a big part of that offense. So yeah, sorry to cut you off. Go ahead.
And there's so much pointing to regression with Baker Mayfield this season. I think just the offense is going to be worse. And they're not going to be able to put up with being the least efficient running game in the NFL like they were last year with Rachaad White as the every now back. Another guy, James Conner, scares me. Really long injury history. Had an awesome season last season. I don't think were we drafting him at all. I don't really recall that. Yeah. But they go out, they use a pretty high pick on Trey Benson. Trey Benson looked terrible in the first preseason game, but Trey Benson had a lot of supporters among looked great in the second preseason game, by
Yeah.
the way. But he had a lot of supporters, like smart draft analysts, who thought he was the best running back in the draft, averaged over 6 yards per carry and over 11 yards per reception in college. I think that eventually, when he gets comfortable in the system or whatever, he could take that job and run with it if James Conner misses some time, which he has been known to do over the course of his career.
Leone, any busts you wanted to mention, or guys that you are avoiding at cost in home leagues?
Zamir White, who, similar to Rashad White, I just think there's a lot of dead zone running back things. Neither back is probably that particularly explosive. Neither back really is playing on an offense that we expect to be that good. Those are danger signs. And Rashad White at least does have activity in the pass game, but with Zamir White, we don't really have that. With Dylan Lobby there, is probably going to take most of that from the get-go. So I think he's someone that could get thrust up in home leagues. He's gotten cheaper as the offseason's gone on. Another one, I'd probably let someone else deal with the Nick Chubb injury thing. I mean, especially if you don't have an IR spot. If you had an IR spot, I guess you could play it, but I think it might take him a little longer to come back than the average fan is thinking. And once he's back, he might not be fully effective year one. It was a pretty brutal knee injury for him.
I don't even like Jonathan Brooks that much, but if I had an IR spot, I'd want it for Jonathan Brooks, not Nick Chubb. I think that would be where I'd want to use my IR spot. All right. Last thing here on running backs is late round strategy at running back and sleepers. So during the season, I really like carrying one injury away running backs. I think that's one way we can build super teams, because let's say we're just carrying Zach Charbonnet on our team all year. Maybe we can use him in a pinch, but more likely we need Kenneth Walker to be out for a game, and then we just print at cost. And the cost is like 0. But in terms of the draft, I'm really trying to draft running backs in more ambiguous situations. Like, I think Kamani Vidal on the Chargers is a way better pick in redraft than best ball. Let's take a shot in round 15 on Kamani Vidal in our home league, see how it goes with Dobbins and Gus Edwards for a couple weeks, see what Vidal's usage is. If it's not great, then just dump him, And so, yeah. Also on my sleeper list for running back, I had Rico Dowdle, Chase Brown, we've discussed. Ty Chandler, I'd probably take the other side of that with Evan, where I think Ty Chandler will play a lot right away with upside for more. Ray Davis, Leone's boy from the Bills. Khalil Herbert, I think, has multiple outs. 1, he could just be the best inside runner that the Bears have. 2, he could end up on the Chargers or the Cowboys or something like that as well. So, yeah, with my late round running back picks, if I'm making them, I am trying to gather guys who I can get information on early. If the information doesn't look good, I can just cut them and move on. Evan, any late round sleeper types for you at the running back position?
Javonte Williams isn't necessarily a late round pick, but he's someone that people aren't aggressively drafting. And he's someone that I moved up recently in my rankings to like a low end RB2. I think that the Broncos showed that they were willing to give him big workloads last year when he didn't really deserve it. And I think that there's a chance that he might deserve it this year, further removed from that terrible knee injury he was coming off last season. Audric Estime has not helped himself in the preseason training camp. Jaleel McLaughlin is what he is at 180 pounds. And now it's looking like Samaje Perine is going to be out the door in Denver. So all of a sudden you have like a potential workhorse situation. He's not really meeting the criteria here of a late round pick, but I wanted to start with him. Chase Brown has been like my favorite sleeper throughout the process. Explosive, was a major workhorse his final season at Illinois. Good offense. I think there's a chance that by week 4, week 5, he's running circles around Zach Moss and has become a big part of the Bengals week to week game plans. Braylon Allen is a guy that you were on really early, Adam, and the way he's looked in the preseason, he is facing a little bit of competition from Isaiah Davis, another rookie that the Jets drafted. But at the end of the day, like, I think Braylon Allen is clearly the second most talented back on the Jets behind Breece Hall. Ray Davis, I've been pretty high on him the entire time because I heard that their OC, Joe Brady, just was banging the table throughout the draft to draft Ray Davis, and Ray Davis has looked awesome so far this summer / fall, and I think he's the clear number 2 back behind James Cook, and they want to run the ball more under Joe Brady, which they showed in the second half of last season. And with some uncertainty in their receiver core, they may be, even further incentivized to do that. And Ray Davis, he looks like a player.
Yeah, the Javonte Williams stuff would look even better if I was at the game last night and Bo Nix threw him a touchdown pass and Bo Nix was like a yard or two past the line of scrimmage. But it would have been a really good play for the confidence on Javonte Williams' receiving role. I do think Jaleel McLaughlin's going to play plenty, but Javonte is way ahead of Audric Estime. Like there was someone who said, is Javonte Williams even going to make this team? That was like a month ago. I mean, these people are out of their minds. So yeah. Leone, go ahead on any later round or sleeper type stuff or macro strategy for late round at running back.
Yeah, I guess the macro strategy is like you're aiming for upside. In general, you've got your starters at this point, and our ranks again like are taking into account that base production, but you have to think like what's your target, what's your goal with a pick, and if it's pure upside, you don't need Jaleel McLaughlin who's going to catch a handful of passes, but probably doesn't have the workhorse upside in Denver. You don't need Chuba Hubbard who his fantasy point projection week 1 is going to be way better than a lot of the guys we mentioned. But if you're not starting him week 1, it doesn't matter. And you care more about what's going to happen end of the season. That's where guys like Braylon Allen, Bucky Irving, Marshawn Lloyd, Ray Davis, these rookie handcuffs that could have, legitimate ceiling performances, just take those guys. You can drop them. You can churn the back end of your roster. Don't be taking, even like in best ball, we really like Antonio Gibson, but I don't know how big the ceiling is there. And part of that's like, we think he's going to have some base role, but you don't really care that he has some base role and could run into a good week in a managed setting.
Exactly. Okay. That is going to do it for this look at the running back position for 2024 home leagues. We will be back very soon with our look at wide receivers for home leagues. In the meantime, be sure you head to our YouTube and hit the subscribe button. Myself, Leone, and Silva are doing a FFPC main event draft on Wednesday night. I believe it's a 2K buy-in or something like that, maybe 2,500. Yes. 2K, yeah. 2K buy-in. We're doing that Wednesday. We aren't going to stream it live because Silva has a heart attack about people stealing our picks if we talk about them before we make the pick. So we were going to record it and then post it. So be sure you're subscribed to our YouTube to check that out. For Leone, for Silva, for producer Ryan, for producer Luke, I'm Adam. Good luck, everybody.